You're listening to Stand Tall and Own It, the podcast for high-performing female leaders who are ready to make an impact by discovering the safety that comes from understanding their own value and exercising their own authority. I'm your host, Andrea Johnson, and I'm here to tell you it is time to just truly be you, my strong friend. It's time to stand tall and own it. Hi there, welcome back to Stand Tall and Own It. This is the podcast where we equip purpose-driven women to lead with authenticity and impact. I'm Andrea Johnson, your host, the Intentional Optimist. And if you have ever found yourself rehearsing a hard conversation in your head again and again, you're not alone. And I'm going to tell you, you're in the right place. Because I most certainly have done this. I tend to do it for some reason in front of the mirror. Any mirror will do, but usually my bathroom mirror where I shut the door. Not necessarily on purpose. It's just kind of my natural spot. And if I'm honest, they're usually much less filtered conversations. They're uncut, they're raw, they're not exactly polished or productive. And yet, I still do it. I'll bet you do too. We tend to tell ourselves that these rehearsals are for clarity, to make the moment less awkward when we actually have that conversation, to get it right, maybe to construct the perfect script. But they rarely deliver the peace or the confidence that we're hoping for. And why is that? Well, that's because the real work doesn't happen in the script. It happens before the script. So this isn't about confrontation, it's about connection. And it requires clarity before you ever even open your mouth. And that's what we're going to unpack today. There are lots of courses and books out there about having the right hard conversation, about communicating perfectly. But a lot of times, those scripts don't work in the moment because our heart's not in the right place. And I don't mean that your heart's in a bad place. It just means you haven't processed things. So whether you're navigating a team conflict, setting a new boundary in your business, or trying to repair a personal relationship, it's not necessarily about saying the right thing in air quotes, right? It's about being clear on who you are and what matters most before the conversation even begins. Now, this episode kicks off our September series where we are reclaiming one of the most essential and misunderstood leadership skills out there, which is critical thinking. If you even look at my Instagram or any of my profiles, you're going to see that I'd say things like, think for yourself. Whenever I'm given the opportunity to be on another person's podcast, the last thing that I share, what do they say? When they say, what is the last thing you want to leave our audience with? It's please think for yourself. You can, you're available, you're able, you have what you need, you're smarter than you think. But critical thinking, my friend, is not an academic exercise. It is not a debate technique. It is a survival tool. It is a leadership strength, and it is a personal freedom. It's what helps you think clearly about yourself, your choices, and the world around you. It's what allows you to just pause for a second, question what's going on, observe it, and using all these frameworks that I've shared over the last several months, but instead of reacting just to every trigger, every headline, or even every emotion. It's how you resist the noise and reclaim your voice of who you are. So this conversation, it's the perfect example of the kind of leadership we're building inside Live to Lead. If you're thinking, yes, this is the kind of clarity I need, well, you're not alone and you're not too late. Whether you come to Live to Lead here in Central Virginia or participate in the Leader Pass online, you come solo, bring your team. Live to Lead is where we take these kinds of skills, clear thinking, courageous conversation, and values-rooted leadership, and turn them into action. It's not just an event, it's a next step in building the kind of leadership culture that lasts. So, like I said, you can come solo, you can bring your team, either way. This work that we're doing right here, this is the foundation of it. So, let's get into it. There's more about Live to Lead. I'll tell you more about that at the end of the show. And there's all kinds of information on my website and in the show notes. But let's talk about why this matters, right? Why does critical thinking matter? Why do we even have to talk about it? Why do we have to worry about what happens before the script rather than just what's in the script of a hard conversation? Well, I need to say these things first. You're not lost. You're just done with everybody else's map, right? This is where so many of you are right now. It's where I was. And if I'm honest, I still am in some ways. Navigating onto my own map, step by step. And that could be in an area of spirituality or understanding economics or in my business. But if you're like me, you're probably exhausted from trying to lead like you're supposed to all the unspoken expectations, the shoulds, the standards that seem to shift depending on who's in the room. It's not just tiring, it's disorienting. It like throws off your compass. If you're leading teams, running a business, navigating complex relationships, not just personally, but professionally, politically, spiritually, all these things come into play. And you're trying to do it all with integrity. I know you are. In systems that reward performance over honesty, results over that, conformity over clarity. So you probably start asking yourself things like, and this is what I was doing, how do I stay soft, present, and human when the world demands either numbness or outrage? There's got to be something in between. How do I speak up without losing relationships, clients, or credibility? How do I keep honoring the humanity of others, especially when the crowd isn't, or when I feel like mine isn't being honored in return? Underneath all of those questions, there's this tangled web of beliefs that you've picked up, some consciously, some through osmosis or conditioning, and some through sheer survival. Things like, if I just do what I was taught, it'll all work out, right? If I just do what I was taught, surely those people knew what they were teaching me, right? How about, it's not my job to question the narrative. I should just keep my head down and lead well. I just don't want to get in trouble. And then there are this is the one that I fell into a lot. I fell into that first one a lot. I just do what I was taught because everybody meant well that taught me. And then this one is that there are many more qualified people who've done this work. I'm a nobody. I'll just listen to them. There are certain areas where it is good to defer to people who really are experts, but we still need to question them because here's the truth. Those beliefs don't hold up when a hard conversation needs to happen. If a hard conversation needs to happen and you think somebody else is more qualified to have it, what are you going to do? If a hard conversation needs to happen and you think, well, it's not my job to question, eventually you're going to explode. And, raise your hand if you have, because I have. Because when something in your gut says, hey, Andrea, this matters, but your training whispers, girl, do not rock the boat, you're already in a moment of misalignment. And that misalignment, it doesn't protect the relationship. It corrodes it quietly over time. Do you have a relationship that maybe you just don't really know where it went wrong? Or you don't really know when you started hating your job? or perhaps you don't really have a turning point that you can point to that says, yeah, I stopped being a blank political party, X political party at this moment, right? Some of us can point to those specific times, but most of the time it just gets corroded over time because these hard conversations are not really rewarded, right? But here's the deal. Clarity, when it's anchored in your core values, is what makes the conversation worth having in the first place. And that kind of clarity, it doesn't come from the perfect script or the conflict resolution tactics. They're all good things, but it doesn't come from them. It comes from doing the inner work first, naming what's true for you before trying to navigate what's hard for someone else. And to be clear, this is not about objective truth or debating facts. It's about understanding who you are, what's important to you, and how you show up in conversations, in relationships, and in leadership roles. I literally had an epiphany in this area yesterday and decided I am not going to navigate for someone else what I've already navigated. I'm going to give them, here's the tools. You get to navigate that on your own. I'm not going to do it for you. Because when you know what matters most to you, you don't need to win the argument. You just need to show up with integrity. There are times when the argument needs to be won, but most of the time, the conversations we're talking about here, they really just need to happen. You just need to show up with integrity, and that's what makes the conversation possible. That's what makes you the kind of leader that people can trust. So let's reframe this, right? Talking about clarity before you have the conflict. I want to be clear, you don't need the perfect words. We're never going to have the perfect words. I could have all the perfect words memorized in my head, and unless I close my eyes and recite them perfectly, they're never going to come out that way. I mean, I even have a script I work from on these podcasts, and I never do it exactly, right? What you need instead of the perfect words is a clear heart and spirit. When it comes to hard conversations, we tend to over-prepare the external things like the script and the tone and the timing, and completely under-prepare the internal work. We forget that how we show up often speaks louder than what we say. When I was a kid, it used to infuriate me when my dad would say things like, "It's not what you said, Andrea. It's how you said it." But true, right? Others feel our energy. They hear our tone, and that's what sticks. So let's reframe it. You're not trying to win. You're trying to stay rooted. You're not here to perform calm or scripted connection. You're here to make sure that you show up with the most integrity, the most honesty, and the most compassion possible. You're here to lead in alignment with your core values. That alignment comes from clarity, and that kind of clarity comes from critical thinking. Now, I want to pause here and define that term because we throw it around a good bit right now. I do a lot, and sometimes it sounds very academic or abstract. So a textbook definition of critical thinking is the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment, meaning I take in information, I analyze what's there, and then I decide what I'm going to think about it. It includes components like analysis, evaluation. Analysis is taking the data and figuring out what it means, evaluating that data, evaluation, inference, meaning what important things do I get from that, or what might this message be coming from that information, problem solving, taking the pieces of it, putting it together and figuring out how to answer the problem, and open-mindedness. So analysis, evaluation, inference, problem solving, and open-mindedness. Put simply, it's how we examine information, test assumptions, and make well-reasoned decisions. It is the literal opposite of reacting in emotion or from a trigger or straight from our unquestioned conditioning. Okay, it's the opposite of the things that come naturally to us. It's literally making us slow down and evaluating and testing and seeing what it is. But in the context of leadership, and especially in the context of connection and conversation, I offer a slightly more personal definition. Critical thinking is the ability to pause, observe, and question, especially your own assumptions, through the lens of your core values. All right, I'll say that again. Critical thinking is the ability to pause, observe, and question, especially your own assumptions, through the lens of your core values. It's how you choose discernment instead of reaction, creativity instead of conformity, clarity instead of chaos. Now, I have said for a while now that one of my top core values is freedom of thought. But I've been wondering lately, think, as Winnie the Pooh said, if that phrase has actually deepened or evolved into something more specific, more practiced, more useful. Because freedom of thought is a beautiful idea, but critical thinking is what puts it into motion. And I've always been a big fan of critical thinking. You know, on every personality test, I come out as one of the thinkers, right? It's how we live out what we value. It's how we take that value and live it out. So it's critical thinking is what allows us to ask things like, is this belief still serving me? Right? And if you've listened to any of my past episodes, you could easily go back there and find, one that talks about, is this belief still serving me? Is this reaction aligned with who I am? Like, what am I so angry about? Or what about this do I think is funny? Looking at my reactions to whatever happens. And am I willing to honor my values even when it costs me comfort? That's the hard part, right? Even when it costs me comfort, to say, I'm going to override my conditioning, I'm going to override whatever assumptions I've made, my own demographics, my own privilege, whatever, and say, but my core value is this. Therefore, I am going to honor that, even when it causes me discomfort in my family or my political party or my job. And if you're preparing specifically for a difficult conversation, whether it's with a team member, a client, a friend, or a loved one, those are the kind of questions that matter way more than any script. Because the truth is, you cannot script integrity. You can't plan empathy down to punctuation, but you can prepare your heart. You can root yourself in what matters. And that gives you the steadiness to say what needs to be said without abandoning yourself in the process, without reacting to every trigger. So as we shift into the next part of our conversation here, I'm going to walk you through a simple 3-question clarity check. This is not a framework for the conversation itself, but it's a reflection tool to help you get clear before the conversation starts. Because the goal here is not to be right. The goal is to be ready, to be prepared, to be rooted, and to be real. So let's go there, all right? 3 questions to clarify before you speak, before you have the hard conversation. Being practical, right? You've probably heard or maybe even said something like, I really just need to have this conversation. But then when you do, you freeze, you fumble, you second guess. And if you're like me, you walk away going, because worse, you plow through the moment without clarity and regret how you handled it. And you have to go back and apologize or mea culpa or whatever. I've shared plenty of times how I've apologized after flying off the handle when I just realized, oh my gosh, I don't even have any control here and my mouth is just going and my brain is not involved. This is where I'd like to offer a tool that I'm starting to use more and more in my own leadership and coaching, and especially in parenting. It's just a pre-conversation clarity check, and it's 3 questions. These 3 invitations are helping you pause before the moment, not just in the moment. And sometimes you're in the moment and you have to step out of it, right? Give yourself permission to step out of a situation in order to come back to it and have the conversation. Because once that moment arrives, it moves really fast, doesn't it? Your nervous system kicks in. You're scanning for risks. You're trying to remember the script that you outlined already in front of the mirror. But if you've already rooted yourself beforehand, you don't need a script. You just need to be present and curious, right? Okay, so that first question with 3-question clarity check. The first question is, what value of mine is being honored or threatened here? This is where you ask, what is at stake for me in this conversation? Is it truth, respect, freedom, connection, fairness, belonging? When something feels tense or off, it's almost always because one of your core values is involved, being validated or violated. And when you name that, it gives you a sense of purpose and calm. Not necessarily control, but calm before you even say a word. And I'll be honest with you, I am walking through this process right now. There's a conversation I need to have with a school administrator. It's technically, quote, just an email, but I know what it represents. And when I ask myself what value feels under threat here, I realize it's belonging. Not mine, but my son's. Yes, there are issues of fairness at play. And if I'm honest, what I see happening feels like othering, and that automatically erodes belonging. If I don't name that value, the conversation becomes about policy, opinion, defensiveness. But when I do name it, belonging, I can lead with integrity instead of urgency. It frames the words I use. It changes the script that I would have written beforehand, okay? So I'm giving you real life examples for each one of these questions right here in this podcast episode as we go. Literally, when I kind of put this script together for this episode, I was like, you know what? I need to walk through this process for this conversation anyway. Let's just do it live. All right, so that's the first question. What value of mine is being honored or threatened here, right? When you name it, it makes all the difference. Number 2, what kind of relationship or outcome am I protecting or pursuing? That's a kicker, right? What is your goal? What's your aim with this conversation? What are you really trying to do? Are you setting a boundary that should have been set a long time ago? And sometimes that's a really hard conversation. Are you trying to repair trust? Are you naming a truth that's been left unspoken for too long or an expectation? Get clear on the why, because not every conversation is about resolution. I'll say that again. Not every conversation is about resolution. Sometimes it's about clarity. Sometimes it's about closure. Sometimes it's just about showing someone who you are, even when they don't agree with you. And I don't mean like in the bad way, in a good way. Because if your goal is connection, that's a very different conversation than if your goal is to prove your point. If your goal is honoring your values, that's very different from preserving your image. For me, with the school situation, I most assuredly want to maintain connection. I believe it's already there, not just with my son and the school, but me and the school. But this particular situation, if left unchecked or unquestioned, will damage it. Do I think that sharing my concern is actually going to change the outcome? Honestly, no. If you've ever run up against school administrators with a policy, you know what I'm talking about. But I do want to gently point out that if things stay as is, the connection and the relationship could potentially be harmed with my now 11th grade son. That's what I want to protect. He's becoming a young adult, and I want to make sure that he has good examples and good motivation as he matures. And I think that being in school nearly 8 hours a day is a perfect place to help do that, right? So what am I trying to accomplish? What do you want? What are you protecting in this conversation? And the third clarifying question is, what part of this is mine to own and what is not? I want to be clear about a couple things. Responsibility doesn't mean blame. Responsibility is not equal to blame. Taking responsibility for something is not the same as accepting blame for something. Leadership, though, on the other hand, does not require that you are in control. I actually believe these are emotional intelligence skills. When you can take responsibility for something without interpreting it as blame, you stay in learning mode. You're free to grow, adjust, and move forward. And when you understand that leadership is influence that is granted to you by others who follow, then you can lead with conviction without needing to control the outcome. This is where you reclaim your lane, and only your lane. You step back into your integrity without dragging guilt or obligation in behind you, right? And that, my friend, is where your power lives. So back to my current situation, I have to own the fact that I have really strong opinions about what should or shouldn't be policy in a high school. But I'm not a teacher. I'm not an administrator. I'm a parent. And as a parent, my job is to put my kid first, whether I should or shouldn't, you know? But what's not mine is the decision. I don't get to make it. I wish I could, but I can't. So when it's made, I need to move on, and I need to make sure that I honor all of that with my own integrity. Am I carrying anything that isn't mine? Like, these are the questions to ask, right? Well, maybe, if I'm honest, a little righteous indignation on behalf of my kid. Except the fact that he's fine. He's already moved on. So helicopter mama needs to back off, right? That's my clarity check. That's what allows me to hit send on the email without burning the bridge or even swallowing my voice. It doesn't have to be either one or the other. So before you walk into that hard conversation, pause and ask yourself those 3 questions. What value of mine is being honored or threatened? What kind of connection or clarity am I pursuing? What's mine to own and what's not? And then sit back and breathe and root in, settle in. And then walk into that moment with your full self intact as a whole human. Not perfect, but not performative. Present, grounded, and ready. So let's bring this all back to the center and remind ourselves, what value of mine is at stake? This is the main question. What kind of connection am I protecting or pursuing? That's the shift. Because once you get clear on that, everything else kind of settles into place. So here's what I'd love for you to do this week. I did this example. As I was working through this, I kind of walked through these questions and I made sure that I had all of that in place, and I sent the email yesterday, okay? So here's your assignment, if you so choose to take it, is choose one brave, honest conversation. It doesn't have to be big, but it does need to be real. I mean, I wrote the email, right? Prep for it internally, not by overscripting, but by doing your clarity check first. If you're not sure which value is driving your discomfort, download that core values blueprint that I have on my website. It's free. I'll tell you about it later. It's in the show notes. It's going to walk you through the process of identifying what really matters most. And if you need support navigating this in your leadership, relationships, or even family, that's what the coaching is for. And I'd be honored to walk through this work with you. As always, though, the reflection questions here are going to help you walk through that process. When you find that one brave, honest conversation, ask yourself those clarity questions, and then ask yourself these. If for some reason you can't come up with one, or you've got one that's been a long time in coming, ask yourself these. What conversations have I been avoiding and why? Yeah, for me, it was the email. I've been needing to write that since May. And it's September, right? What am I protecting by staying silent? I don't know. For me, maybe I didn't want to look like a helicopter parent, right? And I don't want to be a helicopter parent. I want to be a parent that helps her kid grow, right? It's just like as a team leader, I've never wanted to be the person that did it for them. I always want to help anybody working with me to grow on their own. Even in personal conversations, I'm not going to do the research for you. I need you to learn how to do it because that's where the benefit comes from. So what am I protecting by staying silent? And what might shift if I got clear before I got vocal, right? I am 100% sure that I approached the conversation very differently than I had if I had not done this exercise. If you pause with those, journal with them, bring them to your team, your coach, your spouse, your mirror even, let them work for you before you try to work it out, right? Look, hard conversations don't get easier, and they most certainly don't get easier if you put them off, but you can get steadier. You don't have to wait for the perfect moment. Just take the moment and make it perfect, because you showed up with a clear heart, a values-driven voice, and the kind of grounded leadership that this world is really desperate for right now. So if you're ready to take this reflection deeper beyond just one moment of insight, I have a few ways to support you. And that first is with that core values blueprint I just mentioned. It's free, it's practical, it'll help you get anchored in who you are and how you lead. And if you're craving real change in how you lead day by day, start the Core Values Coaching Program. We pair personal coaching with a self-paced course to walk you through this work together. It's a really good back and forth. But if you're local to Virginia, or you're ready for a leadership experience that shifts how you think, work, and grow, join us for Thrive in 25 Live to Lead in either Charlottesville or Lynchburg this October. Tickets are on sale now, and this year's event is designed to help you turn your results into legacy with speeches, and strategies that fuel sustainable leadership. All the links, of course, are in my show notes, which you have access to. Grab what you need, and let's just keep this momentum going. Because next week, we're going to shift deeper into the theme behind this conversation, which is critical thinking, not as an academic skill, but as a practical, radical act of self-leadership. We just scratched the surface today, but next week we're going to go really, really deep. We're going to talk about what it really is, why it's been ignored or downplayed in so many leadership spaces and education, if we're honest, and how to start using it to reclaim your voice and lead with steady confidence, especially when the world feels noisy and super unclear. But for now, stand tall, lead like you mean it, and remember, you don't need the perfect script. You just need a clear heart and the courage to show up with your full self intact. Until next time.